Welcome back. This is day 4 out of 5 of our series on how to heal from people pleasing. So we're almost at the end, and this is another really juicy one. We will be focusing on strategies to stop avoiding your life and feelings. So just like we talked about yesterday, people pleasing causes us to show up and react in 2 big ways. Number 1, we agree to things that don't actually really feel good to us or stay silent. And number 2, we avoid situations where we feel pressured or worried that we'll end up doing something we don't actually want to do. So this video is going to focus on that second category, that avoidance. Learning how to approach what we would rather avoid. This is so essential, again, in every area of our life. So you could apply this to people pleasing or almost anything. Learning how to approach what we're afraid of and would rather avoid is the most important element of effective therapy and healing. This is what courage is, that facing what we would rather avoid. Until we build up our courage, our fear is running and controlling our minds and our lives, not us. We don't have that sense of choice and agency in our lives. We feel a lot of have to, should, compulsion, obligation, duty, guilt, shame. What we're here today is to talk about how you can become bigger than your fear and take ownership over your mind and your life again. As we're talking about avoidance here, I want to make a clear distinction for 2 types of avoidance. There's compulsive avoidance, which is avoidance that feels like automatic, unchosen, we can't help it. Versus there's avoidance where we have proactively chosen not to participate in something at that time and we're saying no to it. So chosen avoidance versus compulsive avoidance, which is putting things off. We'll be focusing on the second category. We're putting things off, we're procrastinating, we're trying to find any way possible to distract ourselves from that thing we don't want to do, avoiding the other person, using any means to forget, numb, shut down, shut out the thing that we don't want to do for as long as we can. This type of avoidance, the fear-based compulsive kind, I think for many people is their number 1 coping strategy that's getting them through life. This is a way a lot of us survive. Some of this comes from the fact that there are areas of our lives, especially work and family, where we may feel all of this heaviness of so much duty and obligation. And we may have these big chunks of our lives where we feel like we have little to no choice and agency, not much freedom, and we have to do so many things we don't want to do. In these areas of our lives where we're feeling this lack of choice and autonomy, this is sort of like that dead, shut off, numb feeling on the inside, because feeling choice and autonomy is one of the biggest parts of living a high quality, meaningful life. When something strips us from having this sense of choice, we're just surviving. And we often survive that lack of choice and agency by just dissociating or numbing out. And then in areas of our life where we feel like we have more choice, our free time, our chosen relationships, we may bring some of that compulsive avoidance into those times and avoid anything that feels like a should and have this strong, visceral aversion to anything that feels like another duty and obligation if we're already feeling so much of that in other areas of our lives. So during our free time, a lot of us may push away and avoid anything that feels like guilt-inducing, any sense of duty or obligation. Oftentimes, we're doing this by bringing in more strategies to numb out and dissociate. This can look like hours spent scrolling on our phones, binge watching TV, losing track of time playing video games, drinking, smoking weed, any other preferred substance you're using, overeating, undereating, compulsive shopping, compulsive traveling. The risk of all of these forms of compulsive avoidance is if this is how we're spending most of our time, we may be living our lives moving from one dissociated, numbed out state to the next, not really feeling our feelings in any of them. And years of our lives can pass us by this way before we feel like we almost wake up again. A lot of the dissociation that we're doing may feel mandatory, like we have no other choice, especially again in areas of our life like work and family. And we may tell ourselves that we're choosing the ways we are dissociating or having a good time outside of work and family. But if we feel like we have no other choice to reach for that thing that's turning off our feelings, this isn't a choice, this is a compulsion. My goal with this series is to help y'all come back to a way of living and being in the world where you feel as much choice and agency in your life as possible. As we're talking about strategies here, I want to make clear avoidance isn't our enemy. We're not here to get rid of it. It's not bad. Avoidance is just one strategy of many. That's why I wanted to make that big distinction between compulsive avoidance and that chosen intentional avoidance. Avoidance that we're choosing, consciously choosing to put something off, can be a really intentional way of buying ourselves more time, respecting our energy, our internal limits, and finding ways to re-energize before we're dealing with something so we can feel prepared. Ideally, avoidance, chosen or compulsive, is just one strategy we have of many. And even more ideally, we're trying to move our lives into a space where we get to spend our lives more than just coping, where we get to find moments where we're not just surviving, but experiencing what it's like to thrive, to feel the joy of being alive. One of the ways you can get there, bringing back in that sense of choice into your life, is to change the way you relate to avoidance. Can you approach avoidance as a choice again? When you're feeling that urge to avoid, shut down, numb, just take a beat to ask yourself, does avoidance feel like the best way I can support myself right now? And you can look to your energy levels for an answer to this. If your energy is really low and drained, avoidance may be a really appropriate and useful strategy to choose at that time. Even when you intentionally choose avoidance, let's be real, you may still feel some guilt and shame over putting that thing off. That internal critic might come in with that list of all of the to-dos, all of the shoulds. You know you've chosen that avoidance. This is intentional. So this is an opportunity to ride out that guilt without reacting to it, which is actually just another way you're building up your tolerance for facing other people's displeasure. In this case, your own, the displeasure of that inner critic in your mind. If we compare chosen avoidance to avoidance that we engage in compulsively, that's usually achieved and maintained through some form of dissociation or numbing out. And the biggest reason we want to practice choosing avoidance is when we don't choose it and it's compulsive, our body, brain, and nervous system is going to continue to operate under old conditioning, that conflict is intolerable, and that we are incapable of handling it. So when we feel guilty about avoiding something, a lot of the times we don't even let ourselves do the thing that we'd actually want. If we're compulsively avoiding and pushing something away, we may reach for a way to dissociate that's also a form of self-punishment. That maybe is where drugs or alcohol or disordered eating comes in. When we're compulsively avoiding, we're really getting nothing out of that. We're not getting back more energy or more resources. And that's why it's so important to really try to reapproach our relationship with avoidance. When we're not choosing avoidance, it feels like we're running away from something. Cue shame. Let's bring all that shame and guilt in. And as we're doing this, I want to be crystal clear that avoiding something does not mean you deserve to feel shame. Not a single ounce of it. It doesn't make you a bad person. However, avoiding something, especially someone, may be very harmful to the other person, especially if your avoidance is leading you to treat them in a way that you yourself wouldn't want to be treated. You might be feeling all that shame and guilt over how you avoided this other person, but that does literally nothing to help them. Usually shame just makes us want to avoid that person or situation even more, and we get stuck in this avoidance-shame loop. We've avoided the person or the thing. We feel shame about avoiding it. We want to avoid them even more. We feel even more shame. And on, instead of doing something that could actually help repair that relationship or any potential hurt we caused for the other person. This is a really important point for me because our culture is so quick to turn one behavior that we do or one behavioral pattern into a reflection of who we are as a person. We don't just tell ourselves like, oh, I just avoided that person. the way we think about it and feel about it is like, I am avoidant. This is who I am. This is me. And we're trained and conditioned to view it that way. So we get stuck in this avoidance-shame loop, which can trigger all these negative core beliefs. I'm just being weak, selfish, lazy. I'm going to keep disappointing myself and others forever. All of these negative core beliefs can come in. And with almost every negative core belief that I named, I have been there and I have felt that too. So I feel you, I've been there, and I also know from personal experience and all my work with clients that even the most deep-seated, painful, hateful feelings that we have about ourselves can radically change and transform. I recognize you're watching this YouTube video, it's 10, 15 minutes. This probably isn't going to change those deep core beliefs and feelings you have about yourself. All I want to do is plant the seed that this is possible. Our feelings about ourselves can radically change. And the most helpful thing to do that is bring in that support. Ideally a therapist, someone who's trauma-informed and uses memory reconsolidation. If it's not a therapist, see if you can find support from someone who is holding a non-judgmental, safe space, who's reflecting back what's coming up for you and just guiding you along into further exploring your feelings about yourself. From this video, I really hope y'all take away two things. The first thing, the most important one, is that even the most deep-seated, painful feelings you have about yourself can change. The second thing is you can transform your relationship with avoidance simply by engaging with it as a choice again. Choosing avoidance is already a way you can start to create a greater sense of choice in your life at large over your own actions. And our actions are one of the only things we actually have control over. So even if you aren't changing a single aspect of your behavior, you're avoiding just as much. Can you take that moment before avoiding something and give yourself permission to choose that avoidance? Just take that beat, tell yourself, okay, I'm noticing a strong urge to avoid this thing right now, and I'm going to go ahead and choose to avoid this. The longer you can wait before acting on that urge to avoid, the more you'll have a sense of choices and options for eventually choosing strategies that are different than avoidance and approaching some of those scary things more. That'll bring you right back to that really important question. Does avoiding this feel like the best way I can support myself right now? This whole process is about practice, not perfection. Every time you're presented with an opportunity to do something different than avoid and shut down, treat this as a test you can't fail at. If you end up falling back into those old patterns of avoidance, the patterns you're looking to change, the only thing this means is you weren't ready to take that test yet, and you need more time, practice, support, and resources before you take it again. And don't you worry, the test will keep coming. That's life. Life is going to keep presenting you with opportunity after opportunity to stay present with yourself and to follow what feels good for you. When you're facing your next test, just again, take that beat and ask yourself, I'm feeling that urge to avoid this thing. I know this is a test. Do I want to have to take this test again?